thank you everyone for joining us for this session. I will get out of the way, but first introduce our moderator, Thiago Esslinger, who is a graduating fifth-year undergraduate student at the Georgia Institute of Technology studying biochemistry and earth and atmospheric sciences, where he has conducted undergraduate research in paleoclimatology and soil restoration. At Georgia Tech, Thiago has served in numerous leadership and founding roles with sustainability organizations and initiatives, where he has worked to advance environmental awareness, expand student opportunities and education in sustainability, enhance sustainability-related communication and collaboration, and increase environmental impact considerations for university investments and events. He has also actively contributed to the Georgia Tech strategic planning process for 2020 to 2030 and served as a leadership circle member of the UN RCE Greater Atlanta Network. Over to you, Thiago.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I'm very excited about this panel and the fantastic panelists we have in person and virtually. I hope we don't have hiccups, but it's okay because most of my degree has been with this setup. So hopefully that means something. A brief introduction to this panel. So we are going to be talking about cities and systems in relation to climate change and environmental injustice. And it's a very exciting topic, I think, because when we talk about what a city is, I feel like one of the first things that probably comes to mind is this maybe government or city hall. But you know, at the end of the day, what runs all the cities that exist, that were made, they're all made and run by people, right? And when we're talking about issues like climate change and environmental injustice, that's exactly who it affects. And so we're pretty lucky today because we have a group of individuals who are both who work in city and also who work in industry. And so when thinking about all of these problems that we have to solve and even how cities run, it is a very complex network I don't even want to try to map out. And so I'm going to briefly go over the structure of what today is going to look like, and then I'm going to hand it off. I don't want to speak too much here, but I'm going to introduce each speaker, and so they're going to have about 10 minutes to share a little bit about their work and what that means in relation to the theme today. And after that, we're going to have a quick moderated discussion and open it up to Q&A. So please do be saving your questions throughout the session. So without further ado, let me get my paper here to introduce our first speaker, Clarence Jackson. So Clarence Jackson is Director of Sustainable Supply Chain at Cox Conserves, the sustainability program for Cox Enterprises. With more than 18 years of experience at Cox, Clarence is a key environmental sustainability leader within the group, and he is responsible for the development and implementation of innovative strategies and leads change across Cox's businesses, suppliers, and industry partners. His focus is on ensuring sustainability targets and objectives are met and in alignment with ESG programs and priorities. Thank you, Clarence.
We're going to do a mic or just talk loud, or what are you going to do?
For the virtual audience, it might help.
Okay. I was going to ask.
Cool. Thank you very much, Thiago. And thanks to everyone for allowing me to be here. So, as he mentioned, I'm Clarence Jackson. So actually my role is a little bit different. It's been expanded, and it's important, and I'll kind of touch on that, why it's important. So I do sustainable supply chain, as you mentioned. I also do sustainable business operations at Cox. I started in newspapers a long time ago. Most people don't read newspapers anymore. But I started in newspapers and operations, which is where Cox started. Cox Enterprises started in Dayton, Ohio, in the newspaper business. We've recently, or not recently, we've, of course, matured beyond that and expanded into media, automotive. We own Auto Trader, Kelley Blue Book, a bunch of other different businesses. We're into sustainable agriculture, so we're all over the place. But for me, I started in operations very tactical, very operational and maintenance kind of things. I truly understand that the need to engage lots and lots of people and how we integrate sustainability. I didn't start in sustainability though. I started in operations and maintenance and mechanical things. I had always supported sustainability at Cox. Whenever a project came up, I'd always say, sure, come to Dayton or come to Atlanta, where I also moved after Dayton. I moved to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and ran the operation there for many years. Got the AJC to be zero waste to landfill, the first newspaper and first business at Cox to do that. That was all about engaging people, right? Engaging everyone, not just the sustainability group. So that's really, really important. So to me, I know we'll talk about that more, about why it's so important to engage so many others. Even though at Cox, we have a really powerful sustainability team, 34 people that are, their 100% of their job is sustainability. We do renewables, we do all kinds of things, zero waste to landfill and everything else. I also am on the board at the Chattahoochee Nature Center. I'm the board chair at the Chattahoochee Nature Center, which our mission there is to connect people with nature, right? So a lot of Title I schools we bring to that center, and it's really, really important to get everyone involved in sustainability. So even though I lead sustainable supply chain at Cox, which involves touching our suppliers and getting our suppliers to help us along this journey, I also engage so many other people. I really want to train other people to be sustainable activists as we kind of go along. So I'll kind of cut it off there because I don't want to go too long. I know we can have lots more questions around this.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I feel like I already have a few questions for you, but I'm going to save that for afterwards. Our next speaker is virtual Jeff. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm going to take that as a yes. So our next speaker is Jeff Freeman. Jeff joined Cimpress in 2012 and has held a variety of roles across multiple functions over the past decade, including environmental compliance and occupational safety, corporate social responsibility, and sustainability leadership roles. In his most recent role as Director of Sustainability, he leads a team focused on environmental and social governance reporting and partners with the Cimpress businesses to drive progress towards the Cimpress Responsible Forestry, Plastic, and Carbon Reduction targets. Jeff, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thanks, Thiago. I'm excited to have a chance to be here with you today, even if it's just virtually, and just talk a little bit about a topic that I spend actually a lot of time on, which is responsible forestry. Next slide, please. So just a quick agenda of what I'm going to cover. So I'm going to give you a brief overview about Cimpress. Many of you may not be familiar with the company, or at least not by that name, and it'll become clear why forestry is such an important issue for us, as well as for small business owners as a whole. Then I'm going to give you some insight into our approach to sustainability more generally, after which I'll do a quick deep dive into a forestry standard known as the Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC for short, and why we think it's important to take into account a broad set of issues when designing sustainability programs, including environmental justice. Next slide. So Cimpress has been around for just over 25 years, originally launching back in 1999 as Vistaprint, as part of the original .com boom. So the secret sauce, so to speak, of Cimpress is our focus on breaking the connection between the unit cost of customizing products. So in the case of Vistaprint, originally it was business cards, from the number of that product that's being produced. So in other words, for years in the offline, more traditional printing business, there was a direct connection between the number of units that you were printing, so whether that was flyers or newspapers or business cards, and the cost of each unit of that thing. So back in 1999, Vistaprint, through a series of patented technological advances, was actually able to break that connection in a number of different ways and make it affordable now for small businesses and consumers to buy high quality, printed and customized products in a way that they never could before. Fast forward 25 years, and Cimpress is now composed of 10 customer-facing brands, including not only Vista, but also businesses throughout the world that are all connected and driven by this focus on mass customization, including both National Pen and Build a Sign and Vista here in North America. Next slide. So here's just a quick slide to give you a look into the types of products that Cimpress and its businesses produce, from paper-based products like books and labels, to signage products like lawn signs and banners, to more promotional products like water bottles, pens, hats, etc. So every year we have 15 million unique customers that use at least one of our brands to produce the products that they then use to make an impression on their customers. Next slide. So many of Cimpress's customers are small business owners, and one of the things that I'm kind of constantly amazed at is how important small business is to both the overall economy as well as to sustainability. So when you read about sustainability news, as I do on a daily basis, you actually tend to read a lot about the world's largest companies and what they're doing, whether it's good or bad, and what that means as it relates to sustainability. There's so many things that are built up around this. There's ranking systems. There's new regulations that are coming in at an incredible pace that are targeted at the world's largest companies. You have huge brands spending millions of dollars for 60 seconds at the Super Bowl so they can tout how green they are. And there's a ton of hiring going on in the sustainability employment marketplace right now to help drive the improvements that are necessary to get these large companies to the targets that they're setting. But there's actually a pretty big disconnect between all that really obvious focus and the importance of small business to the overall economy, and then the impact of those small businesses on sustainability overall for the world. So most people, for example, don't realize that almost half of the economic activity in the United States comes from small businesses in communities. And for those that understand that fact, many actually tend to find it counterintuitive that small businesses, which are generally viewed to be part of a community, are actually estimated to contribute a disproportionately higher amount of industrial emissions than their larger counterparts. We often discount or miss the connection between relatively small footprints of any one individual small or medium-sized business and the impact of small and medium-sized business in the aggregate. Next slide. So as a business, as Cimpress, that has a lot of small and medium-sized business owners as our customers, we know that we can help positively contribute to reducing their collective impact by focusing on sustainability ourselves, especially in the products that we're customizing for them to ultimately, go out to the world with. So with that in mind, we have three main areas where we focus our efforts. As I mentioned, we originally and now continue to this day to sell a lot of paper products. And as an e-commerce company, we ship a lot in brown boxes. So it's important to make sure that the wood fiber that goes into those products and goes into that packaging is not contributing to deforestation, amongst various other important issues that I'll get to next. As a result of that impact, we've made serious commitments to a forestry standard that many people aren't familiar with, but is incredibly important, and that's going to be the focus of the rest of this presentation. Our other two targets, which I'm only going to touch on briefly here, relate to the plastic transition, which is getting a lot of attention, is well underway in the world, which is essentially designed to phase out some of the most problematic plastics, eliminate plastics entirely when they're just simply not necessary, and make sure that whatever's left over is either recyclable or compostable, or even more ideally circular. And obviously in 2023, it's pretty difficult to have a sustainability program where carbon and climate change isn't at the very top of the agenda. We're spending a ton of time, effort, and money here to reduce our emissions, not only from our own production facilities and our own offices, but also in the selections of the raw materials that we use and how we're shipping our products to our customers. Next slide. So I just want to do a quick survey in the room. I can't obviously see everybody, but how many people think that they have seen the FSC logo out in the real world? They actually know what FSC is. Obviously, Clarence, the old newspaper man, would get that connection. I'm not surprised. But I'm not surprised to see that it's not everybody raising their hand. It's kind of crazy, but most people have actually bought product where the FSC logo and some of the associated logos that go along with it are very prominently displayed on the packaging, but either they don't remember seeing it or they didn't know what they were seeing when they saw it. So if you could just advance the slide another click here. Here's just a couple examples of it on everyday products that most of you have seen in your life. So from a Ben & Jerry's ice cream box to a McDonald's coffee cup, the bottom of the Starbucks bag, and I'd be remiss if I didn't include a picture of one of the Vistaprint boxes as well. Next slide. So what's FSC all about? Why does Cimpress strive to buy and sell FSC certified products? So, really simply put, we believe that FSC is the highest, the leading standard that defines what is the most responsible way to produce and harvest the materials that come from forests, and the alternative, what is not the most responsible way. So there's a number of reasons why we support FSC, but I've kind of whittled it down to the top 4. So first and second on the left-hand side, FSC is the highest standard in the marketplace, and it's globally consistent. There are a number of other competing standards out there, but the reality is they're heavily influenced and in some cases just directly aligned with national regulations, which can kind of change at any time as policy change and politicians change. And also in many cases have not had comprehensive stakeholder input, and ultimately as a result don't address some really important issues and leave some really key stakeholders out of the conversation. Third, FSC is the only responsible forestry standard that directly addresses the rights of indigenous people who in many cases rely on forests for their livelihoods, through a seat at the table, and about what exactly the FSC standards are and how they change over time, as well as through free and informed consent processes about the forestry decisions that directly impact them. And then finally, to some degree, a wrap up of the other 3, FSC was originally created in collaboration with leading NGOs, including the WWF, and continues to be, almost 20 years later, the standard that most NGOs continue to support. So it's important for us to know that there are people who spend, day in, day out, focused on nothing other than forestry issues, and we greatly value the signals that they're putting out to the marketplace about what the highest and most protective standards really are. Next slide. So in terms of our work on FSC, we've made good progress. So up on this slide here, I'm only showing our work since fiscal year 2020. We've actually been focused on improving our FSC performance going back all the way to 2016, when we kicked off our sustainability program with our initial sustainable forestry goals. Now, since FY20, we've been focused not only on continuing the conversion of our paper used in our products, but also towards adding e-commerce packaging to our commitments as well. By FY25, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there, we plan to have shifted all of the wood fiber that we use in our products over to FSC certified materials, and 95% of the fiber used in our packaging to either FSC certified or recycled content. We've made solid progress towards both those goals, as you can see, in the 2.5 years since we've been focused on it so far. So just to wrap up, I want to drive home that it's really easy in our efforts to improve environmental performance to kind of get comfortable, to get laser focused in on what many people view as the more traditional environmental issues to the exclusion of other outcomes, including those impacts on people. So for us at Simpress, we believe that when it comes to forestry, FSC is the most protective and inclusive standard, and the one that best ensures the representation of all of our stakeholders, and that's why we're working so hard to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to have to start looking at all the cardboard boxes for that logo. Our next speaker, we have Dr. Luis Aguirre-Torres. Dr. Luis Aguirre-Torres serves as Senior Advisor at Rewiring America, a national nonprofit organization focused on electrifying everything. Before joining Rewiring America, he served as Director of Sustainability for the city of Ithaca, New York, where he led the design and implementation of the first equitable citywide decarbonization project in the United States. He is a member of the Senior Executive Committee for Net Carbon Cities at the World Economic Forum and co-chair of the Technical Work Group on Society and Economy for the State of New York's Climate Impacts Assessment. He holds degrees in computer engineering, an MSc in computer science, and a PhD in electrical and electronic engineering from University College London. He also holds certificates in financing and deploying clean energy from Yale University and in systems thinking from Cornell University. Thank you for being here.
Do I switch slides? Sir? Oh, there you go. Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much. I love being here. I need to warn you, there's a couple of things that you need to know about me. One, I have an accent, in case you haven't noticed. And two, I speak very fast. And the third one is I swear a lot, but I was told not to swear or make political statements, so no fuck Trump or anything like that. So anyway, I want to share with you what I'm doing now for a living. I did swear just now. I'm sorry, Stuart. So Reward America is a nonprofit. It's a very large nonprofit that is working right now with the federal government and a lot of states trying to electrify the hell out of this country. Because we truly believe that electrification is what we need to do in order to really mitigate a ton of emissions in this place. But at the end of the day, we need to do it based on data. We need to talk to people. We need to engage. And we need to do a number of things. It's not just about colonizing, this country again and trying to tell people what to do. It is really about, identifying what is needed, with whom you need to work, and then let them guide you. Because at the end of the day, we believe that, this is all about shared abundance, and this is going to become abundantly clear. That was clever. As I move along. So once again, if we were to electrify everything, we are going to have this concept of shared abundance, which really means sustainable prosperity for everybody, right? So, the reason we believe this is, if you look at the energy stock worldwide, about 60 to 65%, if you believe Princeton University, can be electrified. But then of that can be electrified, there is about 87% of the emissions that come from actual use of energy. So, if we were to electrify everything, we can reduce emissions because we could make it more efficient, and it's a very interesting thing because about 42%, and this is a number like people tend to go like, oh, come on, that's crap. But I promise you, a lot of the decisions that we make at home impact, emissions. So a lot of the decisions that we make in the kitchen table, like 42% of those emissions-related decisions that we make could actually affect the way we fight climate change. And that is because we decide on what cars we drive, how we heat our homes, how we cook our food. We make a ton of decisions at the kitchen table. So we were to focus on, creating that mind shift, like somehow having people thinking differently, when they are having these conversations, we may be able to do something. And this all started during the Reagan years, during that time we were told like, oh, dude, we're going to run out of oil, we're going to run out of energy, so we need to do something. And then, miles per gallon standards came about, and then Energy Star came about, and then it was all about efficiency. But you know what? As long as you use fossil fuels, efficiency, nobody cares, really. Electrification is the actual way of doing efficiency. And that is because, the way we heat our homes, for example, there is like a 70% energy waste in that. If you think about from generation to the point that we use energy, final energy use truly is, 70% waste. So what if we were to electrify? What if we were to replace these ancient machines with these futuristic, Harry Potter type of machines that have efficiency standards of 300%? Fuck it, man. It's just incredible, right? So, And the reason we need to do this, it's also because of people, right? I mean, we need to think about how much money people spend on energy. And we look at, the people, the poorest people in this country and how much money they spend in utility bills, it's just ridiculous. So we were actually, if we were to electrify everything in the United States, we estimate that we'll be able to save about $1,800, per American household. And that is kind of cool. If you think about it, the median income in the state of Georgia, for example, is around $38,000. So just think about how much this represents in terms of the overall income, because if we're talking $38,000, 60%, which corresponds to the low income bracket, we're talking about 10% of what they make. 10%, that's how much money they could save. And some of us were in an exercise just now, like energy burden simulator, and God, that was depressing. But we can help people by electrifying, to save a ton of money. So if we were to do that, we would actually transfer wealth from the utility company to all of these families. So this could be the largest wealth transfer in history for this country, and that's what we mean with shared abundance. So, we are mission-oriented. We believe in this crap like nobody else. I promise you that. But we believe that the work is hard. There's a ton of stuff to do. We need to replace about 1 billion machines in 121 million households in the United States. 1 billion machines. That's a huge number. And that is because we need to replace furnaces, vehicles, water heaters, dryers, cooktops. We need to replace them with electric alternatives. And for those to work, we need to also install electrical panels, maybe solar panels, energy storage. So at the end of the day, we're talking about 1 billion machines that we need to replace and install. And just think about the amount of waste that we're going to generate. So we need to figure out what to do with those billion machines that we're replacing to. So it's not easy. But let me tell you a story. I was a very happy dude until somebody called me from New York and said, dude, we have this huge ambition. We have this great idea in the city of Ithaca in New York because we decided that we want to be carbon-free by 2030. This is 2021. So it's like, okay, so you want to be the first city to go absolutely carbon neutral by 2030. And they were like, yes. So what do you have? Nothing. I was like, awesome. So I was hired to, give life to this huge ambition. And when they hired me, they gave me a piece of paper saying like, this is what we want. Just go crazy, kid. So what is my budget? Well, how $100,000 a year. So, we did the numbers, and the city of Ithaca, 30,000 people population, needed about $2 billion to implement this plan. So that was kind of crazy, right? So we needed to be efficient. We need to think about it very differently because the city was never going to be able to pay $2 billion. So we needed to engage the federal government, the state government, private investors. But first of all, we needed to figure out where emissions were coming from. So we did a greenhouse gas inventory, and we did it very quickly. Normally, these things take like a year, but we did, mostly mathematical modeling. Excel is your best friend in these cases. And we came up with 310,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent that were the total emissions, for the city of Ithaca. So when we did that, we're like, okay, what do we need to do to really reduce emissions? We're like, okay, 4 things, energy efficiency, electrification, decarbonization of the grid, and then eventually carbon removal. So we thought about it, and we created a plan where we're like, okay, we could just be timid about this thing, and we could implement this at 25%. Just go after some households and electrify those. We could also, think about, transportation. We could think about, water heaters, not only, heating and cooling, or we could actually go crazy and start thinking about municipal buildings, transit systems, garbage trucks, and we started thinking, okay, we can do the whole thing. And then suddenly we realized this is doable. This is actually doable. So we started looking at, what is that we need to do, and we created a series, we created a net zero climate action plan with a series of mitigating actions that if you look at it, you will go crazy, like I did. But if you look closely, you will see that, we don't need to do everything to get things going. We need to focus on some, very easy to reach goals. So we were to replace like heating and cooling systems in every household with heat pumps. If we were to, start promoting the use of electric vehicles, and we start deploying infrastructure for that, and we start working with the utility company so we could have the right infrastructure to support that, and we were to change, water heating systems and induction cooking, all of that, we would be 67% all the way to where we needed to be, and we estimated that we could do this in 7 years. So suddenly this crazy, absolutely ridiculous plan that we had of decarbonizing the entire city was within reach. Am I using too much time? Am I okay? I'm cool? Okay. So, what is it? Yeah, oh yeah. And it was an interesting thing because when I presented this to Common Council in the city, they were like, okay, that sounds cool, but where do you start? And I was like, buildings, because buildings really is like where everything meets, right? If you want to, reduce emissions from energy use inside buildings, you need to do, heating and cooling, you need to cooktops and clothes dryers, but then you have the chance of installing an EV charging station because it turns out that there are economic benefits of co-deploying charging stations and heat pumps. And there are economic benefits of co-deploying solar and heat pumps. But if you deploy solar, you start decarbonizing the grid. So suddenly buildings are at the center of everything. But the problem is this whole thing, we did an exercise with a building, like we wanted something to look like this. And we went to like one of the poor neighborhoods and we identified this 200-year-old household that was occupied by a low-income family. And because of remediation, weatherization, electrification, and that stupid little wire that connects the house to the utility pole, we needed to pay $50,000. And, these are people that were not making that much money, right? So how do you do that? So we started looking, okay, what if we were to not do this house? What if we were to do all of the houses that we have in the city? We would turn this into a market, because suddenly, if we were to aggregate all of those, we would look at this as a single project, just similar to the way you have very large solar projects, right? So you have a way of thinking of it like, this is a single project with a very diverse portfolio of buildings and building owners, and that already reduces risk. But if you were to create this in a way that produces a return, then it would be a market for investors. So suddenly we created a market for investors, but we didn't want investors to come in and pay for everything and have everybody giving money back to Wall Street because, I would be fired and crucified in Ithaca. So we need to figure out, okay, what if these guys, and the simplest way of looking at it was, we needed about, for the pilot program, does that mean I need to shut up or no? Okay, cool. So there is we want to do a pilot program with 1,000 buildings and we need $100 million. So we were like, oh crap, how are we gonna do this? Well, it turns out that investors, they want 10% return, and that's a ton of money, but if you think about it, that's $10 million. And then we started looking at the state government and the federal government, and we thought about, okay, we were to do the whole city, how much we get in incentives? And they were like, about $10 million, and they were like, holy crap, that means that we can use the money from the federal government, the state government, to buy down the cost of capital and then pass a 0% interest loan or lease program to the consumers. It's a bit more complicated than that, but at the end of the day, that's what we did. And we created a program that was using financial engineering to make it happen. So we realized that it's everything. It's about people, it's about finance, it's about technology, it's about a bunch of things, but mostly it's about being perseverant, because the challenges are so many, like financial challenges. This thing is expensive. The economics don't always work. We love to say, if you electrify, you're going to save a ton of money, but that's not true for everybody. Don't tell anybody, but it's not true always. So we need to make things work. But then if we were to electrify a whole city, we would need 3 times the infrastructure that we have for the distribution grid. So we need to work with the utility company, and that means a lot of money needs to go in there, and that money is from ratepayers, which means electricity rates may go up. So we have a nightmare scenario, right? So we need to get the federal government involved, and we need to change the way utilities charge for electricity. But we also need workforce. The city of Ithaca had 30,000 people. We needed 3,000 people to implement this program. No way we can have 10% of the population as a workforce for this. So we need to engage with other cities, and then it became a regional project to do this. So it was cool. It was expensive. It was hard, but I promise it was a lot of fun. I really am 28 years old. I just look 50. But so at the end of the day, everything costs money, because you need to educate and engage people. You need to do energy assessments. You need to design electrification projects, and everything that you see on the screen. Everything costs money, but there are ways of reducing costs. And I'm approaching the end of the presentation. I have 1 minute. Okay, cool. So I may make it. So the problem that we had in Ithaca is that we were not a sophisticated market. We had one heat pump manufacturer in town. So we need to turn this into a primary market. So what did we do? We made an announcement to the world. We're electrifying the entire city. And then, manufacturers started calling, saying like, I'm Mitsubishi, I'm LG, I'm Fujitsu. And everybody wanted to play with us. And then we also issued an RFP. As a city, we said, we're not going to work with a guy to do weatherization and a guy to do electrification and a guy to install solar panels. We want a consolidated company that could actually do everything. So we reduced fragmentation in the industry. And by virtue of having the whole city, we had bulk purchasing power. We could do this at scale. And then we could maximize the incentives that were coming from the government, because we were not giving them one by one. We were aggregating the incentives, using them to buy down the cost of capital, and then suddenly we were unlocking incredible amount of financial flows. So suddenly we were doing this, and with the help of the government, we didn't need to look at the credit score for people. We had what is called a loan loss reserve that allowed us to provide protections for people that want to borrow money from us. So we didn't need to look at anything. Suddenly this could work. So anyway, I'm going to skip a few things, but what we learned is that this thing is possible. We just need to change, the way people think. We need to change the way government look at this. We need to change our approach in general to climate change. It's a bit more pragmatic now. We need to think about communities. We need to think about climate justice very differently. We cannot use census tract for crying out loud. Please. Don't use census tracts. That's not local information. That tells lies. It really doesn't tell the story of our cities. So we need to get local information to do better, because at the end of the day, we want to really drive this towards shared abundance. We need to do things very differently. So go electric. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to always have that energy for the rest of my life. So our next speaker, before we move on to a little bit of discussion here, we have Odetta MacLeish-White, who is the Director of Georgia Initiatives for the Center for Community Progress. In this role, she brings thought partnership and strategies for vacant, abandoned, and deteriorating properties. Prior to joining CCP, Odetta was the Managing Director for the Transformation Alliance, a partnership of nonprofits, government agencies, and businesses working with residents of impacted communities in shaping better health, climate, and economic outcomes through arts and culture-based community engagement and by improving housing, transit, and jobs access. She earned her JD and LLM in international law from Duke University School of Law. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I can't believe I have to follow you, Luis. And my presentation will be a little shorter, so we will have plenty of time for, maybe you could go back and some of the slides you missed, we could do those. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Odetta MacLeish-White. It's such a pleasure to be here today. An unusual panel for me to be on, certainly. But I am here both as a representative of Center for Community Progress, but also as a member of the City of Atlanta Clean Energy Advisory Board, which has recently relaunched. So first, I'll just talk a little bit about community progress and then just give a few speaking point updates from the advisory board that were provided to me. The Center for Community Progress is the only national nonprofit that deals with vacant, abandoned, and deteriorating properties, or VADs. We do this work towards our mission to foster strong and equitable communities where vacant, abandoned, and deteriorating property are transformed into assets for neighborhoods and for neighbors. Thank you. Our goal is policy and practice change at all levels. And we affect that change through a variety of services. Where we can provide them free of charge. Sometimes it's fee for service. But whether it's training, conferences, technical assistance, policy design, et cetera, our goal is to partner with local governments and with residents to come up with strategies that are racially equitable and focused on shared community vision and goals for the type of properties I've described. Next, please. Oh yeah, all the numbers. We've helped over 300 communities in 35 states, blah, blah, blah. We're great. Thank you. And we have been around for a while, is how you can get to that sort of scale, right? So I always like to just take a moment to talk about systemic vacancy in communities, because when you see a vacant building or an abandoned building or a vacant piece of property, it is the visible symptom of several other systems that are, you could argue, functioning not well, whether that is a delinquent property tax moment, whether that is a code enforcement moment and the family is unable to pay those liens. It can be as large as more systemic issues of institutional, the inability for a generational wealth creation, low wages, all sorts of things are implicated when you see an empty plot of land. We like to then sort of, we've created this visual to help take you through sort of what happens. And many of us might talk to family members who remember a small, walkable, vibrant neighborhood where they grew up. Everything was available, that lauded 15-minute community. But unfortunately, fault lines were built into many of those communities. And you can build on a fault line and live there for a very long time. But when the first sort of shock comes, those lines will open up. So equity challenges around, as I said, racism in financing, zoning, the way that families were placed in certain areas, and then triggers, of course, economic, natural, climate disasters, government decisions. Let's put that highway through this community, for example, are the kind of triggers that will start to shift the market. Where folks begin to think, should I be staying here? You might have something like white flight. You might also have very logical decisions around, I see the value of our home going down, or it has been taken from us by eminent domain. Once the market begins to shift and you set up the conditions for either a loss of value and the house prices might decline, or investors will come in, or investors come in. Those often are linked. And sometimes investors are not interested in flipping a property and putting someone back in there. They will hold it until the market comes back around and they can really make a profit. And I'll talk a little bit more about the impacts of systemic vacancy, but that is sort of the end of our cycle there. In terms of shared impacts, we just talk sort of in three big buckets around public health, individual wealth, and community fiscal stability. Vacant properties create unsafe environments for occupants, whether it's a lead or asbestos situation. It creates unsafe environments for the neighbors. There could be crime implications and other safety issues. And we also now know that it really affects mental health. To be consistently in vacant and untended neighborhoods. Individual wealth is lowered, the surrounding property values are lowered, which can threaten your investment. Your insurance can ironically go up, and oftentimes the deterioration will exceed cost-effective repair or what you can just afford to do as a family, right? And then, of course, when you have property taxes that aren't paid, or you have, but yet you're expected to send out the firefighters when there's a fire, to the code enforcement guys have to be paid. So the shared tax digest and the shared community fiscal stability is really affected by vacant and abandoned properties. Center for Community Progress has a lot of very great information on our website. I just wanted to direct folks to this one. I'm sure these slides will be made available afterwards, and you can sort of click through. But we try to think about stewarding vacant property and buildings, and these are just sort of the direct impacts that we have explored in the publication that's linked here. But all of these, I just sort of talked about in the macro sense, but each one of these has many more examples that can be explored. And then just a quick note to try and connect to our panel here. I just wanted to sort of note, not yet for me, thank you. When you think about abandoned buildings or vacant buildings, who owns them? If the municipality owns them, have they shut off the utilities? There can actually be a lot of waste for vacant buildings. They are perhaps properties or land that is not being optimized for green infrastructure and stormwater management. And what about exploring energy generation? How could you use land or buildings for resilience within communities, creating hubs? Perhaps small solar farms? Can we look at other ways to create energy and electricity? I think that's everything for community progress. Yes, okay. So that would be the end of my slides for this one. And then I just wanted to just do a quick few speaking points on behalf of the Clean Energy Advisory Board, which was relaunched in February of this year to help build public support for the Clean Energy Atlanta Plan. That energy plan was adopted in 2019 by unanimous City Council, and it charts a path to achieve 100% clean energy for all Atlantans by 2035 with a focus on energy equity. So it's always great to hear you talk about sort of those burdens, right, on different households. I'm sure we'll talk about that. There are 6 seats on the board, I want to point out, for community leaders from the city's 6 most energy burdened neighborhood planning units. And there are 4 working groups: the Clean Energy Funding Working Group, 1 for Community and Partner Engagement, 1 for Decarbonize Atlanta, and 1 for Transportation Infrastructure. And then in closing, this relaunch of the board will be a 1-year process to update metrics, to sort of refresh the plan. And you can go to www.100atl, so the number 100atl.com, to see a lot of metrics, dashboards, and all of the minutes and materials for the advisory board. So good transparency on that. So with that, I will turn it over to our questions.
That was nice.
Let's see if this... All right, well, thank you all so much on talking about each of your individual works. And I wanted to think a little bit more about the theme in this session of how to kind of connect all of your works together and this idea of living systems, living ecosystems. So I was curious to know if, with all of the work that you do, how do you think that fits into this idea of what a living city should be? If that's an idea you subscribe to, if not, do you have a better description for what that should look like? If anybody wants to go first.
Been a while since you talked.
And sorry?
You want to define living city? Or?
Sure. So living city, when I say that, I mean something run by people and something of a network of sorts. So it's not top down, it's not bottom up, but it's a bit of both. And so that's involved with educational institutions, business, government. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. And I'm going to limit it to about 5 minutes total.
All right, so the mic's still in my hand, so I'll start. And then you guys can live in suspense about which way I'll go when I'm done. I think for me, the first important concept is to remember that a city is a shared experience, right? I am not a subject matter expert on forestry, electrification, et cetera, operationalizing newspapers, but I do love, I'm a city girl, that's where I grew up. And I think our focus sometimes on specializations sort of puts metrics and measurement at the center when in fact what we're trying to do is create a shared life experience in shared space, right? My background is in affordable housing. I have developed it, I have worked on policy for it, and I can see the thread throughout my career of affordable housing, but has brought me to this question of land and how we use it, and how can vacant land specifically be turned into something that neighborhoods have agency over. And I think that is probably deep in the heart of what we're talking about, the actual engine of all of this conversation. How do we give agency to rectify power imbalances, whether that's your electric power or however it shows up. We could talk about different semantics too. But there really are power imbalances, unfortunately, in how we're creating cities. And so to me, a living city is one where the many decisions that people have to make on a daily basis are facilitated by their built environment, or by how they are accessing utility, how they're accessing information and entertainment. All of those things should be circling around a sense of human design, a sense of, if I'm a parent, you know, as a person, I don't brush my teeth on one day and take my kids to school on the next day and fix food on the third day. You do everything every day and try to make it all work. So what are the ways that all of these interconnected systems, the building you live in, how much you pay to live there, where it is placed, how much you pay to get information, how do you get onto transportation, roads, your bike, your car, whatever, to get around and do the things you need to do. That to me is sort of what a living city would be, and an equitable one facilitates those processes for families that live there. And we all agree that it's a shared experience. If you want to have total control over your house and your land, you go buy your 4 acres somewhere else. If you're going to live in a city, you're going to hear other people, you're going to see other people, you're going to need to share all of the infrastructure that is created. And so it is sort of the ultimate group project in that sense. So yeah, I think that's my somewhat rambly answer, and I'm going to go this way.
Cool. Very cool. Thank you. That's great points. So for Cox, I'll talk about this. So we're in the city of Atlanta, of course, our headquarters, and some other operations, but we're across the country and actually in other parts of the world. We realize, you know, we're a for-profit company, right? Privately and family run and operated, $22 billion. And we have a goal of growing our company. We're doing it responsibly, of course, by having these carbon, water, and waste goals that we have, very ambitious. But we also know that we have to support the community, right? And not just our community here in Atlanta, but across the country. So we instituted another program called 34 by 34, where we're trying to, or we will, positively impact and lift 34 million people up by 2034. And we're doing that through so many ways. Of course, through work like I do with the Chattahoochee Nature Center, educating youth and different people. But also last night we had our Techstars launch with Impact Techstars, which is 10 businesses that are doing things, you know, socially responsible things. The LGBTQ support, you know, recycling, and all these amazing things. So we're also realizing that, you know, we want to grow our business with telecom and others, but we also have to support the community because we're all connected, as you said.
So now I'm going to have to follow you, and that's not fair.
Totally fair.
Yeah. No, I mean, here's the thing. You know, a lot of us, you know, there is this pragmatic camp that looks at climate change as an economic issue with horrifying social and environmental ramifications. You know, and we see it that way because it comes from a market failure. You know, these power imbalances, these asymmetries of information, but mostly, you know, these externalities, you know, these negative externalities that we cannot make part of the economic model. But if we were to make those, if we were to make, you know, emissions in the construction of a new house part of the economic model, then suddenly you'll have to pay more for a house that pollutes. So suddenly it's no longer an externality, but to do that, to make that change possible, we need to work with the community, we need to work with government, we need to work with regulators, we need to work with businesses. So at the end of the day, it is all about weaponizing social capital. You know, it is about getting social capital to where it has to be so we can really drive towards sustainable prosperity. So at the end of the day, it's those connections, those bridges, those, you know, that has been built throughout the years that will enable us to really find and implement solutions. So it is definitely, you know, in line with the concept of a living city.
Thank you. And Jeff, before you go to answer that, I have a question that I would like to move on to, if that's okay. I think
the panelists said it better than I would have, so that's great.
And this one, you can go ahead and start first. But when thinking about the problems that cities face, here we're talking about climate change and environmental injustice. How do you effectively communicate these problems to different audiences? And if it is something that you face in the work that you do, what impact does greenwashing have in all of that?
Yeah, sure. So I spent a lot of time communicating to internal stakeholders, again, in a public corporation about sustainability. And I quote John Kerry all the time. John Kerry gave a presentation to the American Bar Association a couple of years back, and he said, "You're all climate lawyers now." And I have this slide where I take that quote and then I cross out climate lawyers and I put climate procurement professional, climate FP&A professional, climate, et cetera. And because ultimately I think every single part of the organization needs to be pulling in the same direction and understand how the work that they do directly relates to us hitting our climate goals. And so I think that's kind of the first part to help them see, like, they definitely have a role to play here. And then it's not so much about what I would call generic communication. I think it's about going in and getting your hands dirty and helping work with them to help them understand what that means in the day-to-day of the work that they do. And it's actually part of the thing about the sustainability profession that I really love, because being able to do that forces you to learn almost every portion of the business. So you have to learn about marketing in order to talk to marketing people about sustainability marketing. You need to learn about, real estate in order to talk to real estate people about sustainable real estate. Procurement, all the way on down the line. So I think there's the initial communication part, but I think that's just the start of it. It's actually more about getting in deep in each of the areas and working with the folks on it.
Thank you. If maybe one of the other panelists also want to jump into that.
That makes me think of something we did with Transformation Alliance. We were trying to create a scorecard for an equitable development near transit. And we had wonderful partner, South Face, that kind of used their expertise in sort of green building certification to come up with a scorecard. We did all sorts of stuff, took all of the MARTA stations in the system, and we sorted them into market typologies. And then if you're living here, you want this kind of housing, and we sort of set up all things. And then depending on what typology you're in a certain version of the scorecard applied to that typology. And we were in our rooms talking, and we finally got a chance to take this scorecard out to a community that was actually trying to speak to the Beltline, actually. Some development was coming. It was in Murphy Crossing. And we were like, we have this scorecard, and if we could show MARTA, show the Beltline, rather, the score of the development that they have put out on RFP, relative to what you all want, like, great talking point, right? They did not understand this scorecard at all, right? It was so, it was technical. It was so technical. And we ended up having to just attend several of their community meetings, and we listened and we interpreted, like, we just need more businesses. Like, okay, so the part of the scorecard that talks about business is here, and it sounds like you want, 10,000 square feet. So we'll 9 points for that. We had to translate the thing, and we, kind of weren't able to get it to its natural conclusion, which would have been sort of like a people's RFP. Like, how could you translate what the people want into a language that makes sense to a developer, et cetera? But it really taught me that, like, conversation before the scorecard, right? Or conversation as you're building the scorecard is so incredibly important, because we can build a thing that makes so much sense. And then you get to the people that need to use it, and they're just like, they absolutely had no idea how to start with this thing that we thought looked quite intuitive, despite, massive amounts of tabs and Excel, formulas. Like, don't click on a cell, because it would open up this formula that would, drive you crazy, right? You immediately lose touch with reality. So conversations first, always, and finding ways to combine good conversation with the problem-solving techniques, I think, are really critical. And then you might avoid some of the greenwashing, because people will feel included and not pushed away.
Thank you. And I realized I didn't define greenwashing before, so really quickly, just this idea of communicating sustainability where there's more talk than walk, maybe. Let's put it like that. And so I want to shift gears just a little bit here to talk about the business case for sustainability. So, this is something I have seen when trying to put forward sustainability solutions. There's always this follow-up question of what's the economic incentive? And so I wanted to ask, because this was already in a lot of the points that y'all talked about, how do you balance making a business case for sustainability, and where does equity fit into that?
Well, I'm going to start, but I think, it's not that how equity fits into that. I think equity is the whole thing, at the end of the day. When you are, there's just so many studies, that have tried to identify the cost of not doing anything, the cost of continuing business as usual, and then you can put a dollar sign to the cost of implementing, for example, electrification at the country level. But the reality is that you need to take into account the social cost of carbon. You need to take into account, the health, the costs associated with health, particularly in a post-COVID economy, for example. So when you actually take all that into account, you actually bring the externalities in and you make it part of the whole thing. The business case is always positive. The problem is that it's not that apparent. And, from a government point of view, if we were to take all of this into consideration for every policy decision that we make or every policy that we define, then we'll be able to actually see, what that positive business case means, in terms of policy development. So I think, from a public policy point of view, when you think about the cost of implementing certain policies and the cost of giving money away so people could actually implement, all of these actions like the IRA is trying to do right now, you'll see that, the benefit is clear and the return on social investment, the social return on investment, it's quite immediate, but it's not that apparent all the time.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, especially the external costs, right? Having all the external costs embedded, especially for things like waste, right? Like right now where the burden is on municipalities, right? The manufacturers really truly aren't paying and sharing the cost of what it should cost to dispose of things. At Cox, we're very much about, being transparent. I think you also touched on that. If you're transparent, it's much harder to greenwash. Like if you share everything, if you follow standards, right? Whether these be science-based targets or whatever they may be. So that's a big thing for us. It's very difficult for a company like Cox because we're so diverse, conglomerate that has hundreds of different types of businesses to do that. But that's something that we're really working hard at is to gather all of our data around our businesses on what we consume. I'll start on just energy, carbon, water, and waste. That's hard enough. Scope 3 is extremely difficult. And we're working really hard right now to truly understand our supply chain. That's where I come in. We spend billions of dollars. And that's where most of our emissions are. They're embedded in all the products that we use. Even when we send cable boxes, we still send cable boxes out, or modems. There's a ton of carbon in that. But it's not our carbon, it's our Scope 3 carbon. The people plug those in. But we're working really hard to gather all the data and report the data. So for us, it's the more data that we gather, meet people where they are, and put it in a format that people can understand. And then we report out on it, we use it, we share it with our employees so that we can all understand what we're doing and so that we can all be part of coming up with solutions.
And so last question here before we turn to the audience. And this was touched on a little bit. You just said they're meeting people where they are. And a few of you mentioned this idea of training people, right, in your presentation. Luis, you mentioned this idea of not recolonizing, right? So how exactly do you train people in this space? It might be very simple, it might be complex, but what does that actually look like in practice? And especially, right now we're in a university thinking about maybe the students in the room, what sort of role do they play in this transition to a sustainable city? So maybe a two-part question there.
I think there's a lot of capacity out there. Because we tend to silo up, folks might not see it, but the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, there are nationally recognized environmental experts in Atlanta through the Atlanta University Center, at Spelman, and they are coming from the communities that are directly impacted. So less about training and more about truly building an authentic, inclusive network of experts who will get you into the rooms that you need to be in, and who should be the leader in how you talk and design things. A lot of data is built on the backs of individual families and households. They become the data, but then they don't see either the results of the reporting, or they can't quite, or it's not presented in a way that sort of resonates to them, or somebody goes off and writes a grant based on that data, and then they get money to do a thing and it doesn't come back. So where you can allow leadership, or make lots of room for the brilliance and leadership that's already in these communities, to help create the spaces that make sense to them to hear about. The issues, they will express the issues in the way that resonate for them. Again, it's going to be, what has made your life tough today? I couldn't pay another bill, right? Why is my energy bill so high? Why don't I, they will express it differently. But I think the translators are there, and students getting out into the community and finding them, and just sort of, contributing their own knowledge and learning in those spaces. When you step into your academic or other professional roles again, you will bring that sort of changed perception, or your own lived, some of the really interesting evolutions in the planning field and in other fields that touch affordable housing is coming because finally kids who maybe were from marginalized communities have gotten, their certifications and their credentials, and now they are in there saying, I'm going to change this zone for such and such city because I know how to talk to that older gentleman who owns a bit. They're just bringing their lived experience to it. So I really, want to make a lot of room for the fact that it's there. The expertise is there. It will look differently. Some folks come and get a credential and can sort of be a bridge. Others are situational natural leaders, but they are the ones that can help point everybody in the right direction, or the direction that's going to resonate the most. And they're often, I think, so much more able to absorb information than we, I think, sometimes assume when we get into our silos. We think we have to say it a certain way or change how we're saying it. I'm not saying we don't, but let them guide you on the ways that make sense to express your information.
And online, Jeff, did you want to add anything as well?
Yeah, I think it's actually very similar in the corporate setting as to what Odetta just said, which is that, I often say, procurement professionals have to teach procurement professionals how to procure stuff. And finance professionals need to teach finance professionals how to finance stuff. If it ends up being sustainability people teaching procurement, or sustainability people teaching, HR people, you can get only so far. And so when I think about, new entrants into the workforce, or people still in university and trying to figure out, what kind of skill sets they want to build before going out into the workforce, I think, adding sustainability into that tool belt, which will allow you to be that person in that organization, that part of the organization, no matter what part of that organization you're entering, to be able to help do some of that training. Ultimately, I think that's very, very much in the infancy stages. But whenever and I keep using procurement as an example, but whenever I talk to young procurement professionals, I tell them, if you're not building your sustainability skills now, I think you're going to be, out of luck, 10 years from now. You're going to be out of date. I can understand how somebody at the end of their career maybe isn't building up a whole new skill set, but if you're going to be in the workforce for the next 30, 40 years, you're going to need it. So you might as well build it now and be that advocate.
Let me add to that. 2020, it was a peculiar year in general. But, it was the year also where the United States as a country and several states were beginning to do the economic climate impact assessment, trying to identify what the impact of a catastrophic climate event could be on the economy. And, COVID helped us understand that very well. We identified some very vulnerable industries, very vulnerable occupations, very vulnerable population groups. And, if you think about climate change affects everybody disproportionately. And there are people that will be more affected than others, industries and occupations that will be severely affected. So what we need to do is to think about it in those terms. It's all about economic resiliency. Post-COVID, it's all about economic resiliency in the face of climate change. there are, like so many organizations reinventing the wheel right now. There are so many organizations that have come to me as an organization, to us, with ideas on how to, accelerate workforce development. And the reality is that, there are some programs like, there is this program that Van Jones developed before going to the White House and then CNN and then becoming a celebrity. He had this thing in Auckland called Roots of Success that now is run by the University of San Francisco's Raquel Pinderhus, who actually developed a fantastic curriculum that was initially focused on people that were about to leave incarceration, to come in and be part of the workforce. And then they expanded that to undocumented. They expanded that to people that were normally having trouble getting a job because of, some very specific attributes of all of them. So there are programs and curriculums and, ways of bringing people into the workforce, but we need to start thinking differently. And I just want to give one example of something that went terribly wrong, but not because of what we thought. We were, developing, workforce in an accelerated way in Ithaca. So we invited, people from the whole state of New York to participate, and we had a ton of formerly incarcerated people, we had a ton of undocumented people, we had a ton of minorities coming to these programs, and from an equity point of view, that was fantastic. But then employers were not ready for them. They were terrified of incarcerated, undocumented, or people that didn't look like them. So we needed to develop a program to train the employers before these guys could come and work there, therefore delaying the whole thing. So it's not easy. Once again, you're dealing with people that's beautiful, you're dealing with people that's horrible. It's just always complicated. But it's an important piece of what we're trying to do.
All right. Thank you all so much. We have about 8 minutes. Okay. I've been told 8 minutes. Who? You can go ahead.
Hi. So I had 4 questions, so I won't do all of them then. So I guess on the corporate side of things, so I'm an interior designer. So in our field, we have LEED, we have WELL, we have a bunch of sustainably minded design practices that our firms require us to have in addition to regular certifications that we take after graduation. What is that like in other fields, whether it's development, newspapers, and Cox Enterprise, and just corporate fields? I was wondering how that shift is happening across the board.
And if we can keep it to maybe a minute so others can ask their questions.
So we integrate all of those things where it makes sense, right? Some places it doesn't make sense, right? Like we look at our business, we make sure that we're doing a project, whether it's LEED or Fitwell, right, or any of those things. When it makes sense for a building, based on how long we're going to be there, how many people are in the building, we're having a big shift right now. A lot of folks are working from home. So are we going to go through and LEED certify a building when we have to make some pretty tough decisions about if we're even going to be in the building long term? But we integrate all those things, especially when we look at all the data and where it makes sense. Like some of the buildings, if it's not going to make sense for us as far as financially or even energy or anything else, we may not certify it for a LEED or something like that. So we're very, we're not rubber stamping or stamping everything the same. We're looking at it building by building and location by location.
Yeah, I think I can jump in there too. So I'm going to take that question maybe a slightly different direction. If you're asking about as a new entrant into the workforce, what kind of certifications employers are looking at from a sustainability standpoint beyond LEED, my instinct is to say that in the real estate area, like in the facilities area, LEED and all that have become very established, Fitwell, as you mentioned as well. The rest of the certification standards, it's very much a wild west. I don't personally see any singular certification that individuals are getting to be dominant as compared to other fields. And so I have a number of people on my team that are figuring out what their professional development looks like. And at this point, we're actually kind of holding off a little bit on certifications because they're wary of spending too much time on any one individual certification that ultimately kind of doesn't catch traction. So I think it's more about individual skills that you can prove out as opposed to some, specific certification.
Thiago, could I also just encourage everyone to consider your diversity, equity, and inclusion types of trainings, a skill set around understanding and managing that side of your own personal growth, but dealing with other people, I think is also a 21st century skill set that there are lots of ways to get at.
Thank you. Henry, and then back there.
I probably not that, but it's okay.
Thank you. I'm Henry Slack. I'm a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby, and I love Rewiring America. We actually have some cards printed up if anybody wants one to know more of some of what they do as well. But I also want to, yes, and it was your term shared abundance that struck me, because some of the fear mongers are like, oh God, you're going to give up your Mustang and you won't be able to drive, 80 miles an hour on 85 or 285 or such. And in reality, an electric car can accelerate a lot better and cost less to maintain and so on. So I just wanted y'all to riff on shared abundance. Jeff, I was thinking of you and the fact that you're moving to 100% recycled means you can collect boxes at your stores and turn around and reuse them or send them off to recycle with the same truck that delivered them. And, presto. You have an abundance of supply once you have 100% recycled. So anyway, shared abundance is my question.
Well, until we get public transportation, you can't drive your Mustang 85 miles an hour on the highway anyway, but that's my pitch for that.
What she said. No, I mean, at the end of the day, we can enable a wealth transfer for the first time. We have clear guidelines in terms of what we need to do to make it possible. And, equitable, electrification, it's the first step, but then equitable transportation. And then we need to think about everything that we need to do to address climate. And for the first time, make decisions in a way that will not disproportionately affect some people. Because every decision that we have made up until, a couple of years ago to fight climate change really screw up a population group somehow. So now we need to stop doing that. We need to think of it, from a systems point of view. We need to see how everything is affected by every single decision that we make. And if we do that, then, we'll put people in the same footing, and then suddenly, equity can be solved. Yeah, sure.
First off, thank you guys for coming out and sharing your time with us. I had a corollary to his actual question regarding the business case. And what I mean is more in a historical parallel. You mentioned earlier about Reagan and so on and so forth. I think it's really, really important now because as we look forward in an era where, take for example, the receipts for municipalities might not be where they need to be because of depressing real estate values. A new administration might come in and rewrite many things. So could you try to, again, go into a little bit detailed? You mentioned 10% rate of return. Can you add some more fidelity or granularity about how that was done exactly? Because Ithaca, although it's in New York, I believe Cornell is relatively pretty close. I'm pretty sure that plays a role into the credit profile of your municipality. I'm pretty sure much of the revenue comes from there. So can you go into a little bit of that and how Atlanta or any other municipality might be able to deal with that or copy?
I'll do the very quick version. I mean, Cornell plays a role, but not in the way that you think. Cornell doesn't pay any taxes, right? So that just means that we socialize the cost of having Cornell there in a very different way from what you think. So the municipality doesn't have, the tax revenue that it should have based on the real estate. So that is one thing. And then Cornell University was half of the population of the city. So it should be called Cornell/Ithaca, And then you were asking about the 10%. That's a different question. The problem with COVID is that most of the debt service for every municipality in the entire country is at the limit. So there is no municipality, including the city of Atlanta, that could afford, any program like the ones we're talking about. So there is a need for the federal government to come in, but there is also a need to use the federal government's money to attract private investment. And to attract private investment, you need to present an opportunity for them. It's a business. These guys run businesses. So right now, for example, the Treasury Department and the SEC, they are changing the guidelines in terms of ESG investment. So now instead of going and, sponsoring, trees in the Amazons, for example, you could use that to, for example, electrify right now because there is a way of verifying, carbon mitigation by replacing a fossil fuel appliance. So now that opens the door for a different type of investment. So 10% is an example that I gave, but the reality is that we can think about bringing private money for like 2-3%, way below market rate. And if we do that, then suddenly these programs, if you were to think of it exactly the opposite way we do now, like somebody of low income with high interest rates and with high income with low interest rates, if you switch it around, you're actually able to finance things differently. You just need the government to come in and help out those of low income. That was a short answer. Sorry.
Okay, so we do have time for one more question, actually. So.
Hi, thank you. Hello again. So my question is actually about civic engagement. I feel like we've discussed a lot, corporations and education and certifications and stuff like that, but really these habits start with families and they start with the household. So how do we engage the public if they don't have these educated individuals around them? Like, how do we litter less? How do we create habits of recycling, for example? Like, how do we reach those people? And what efforts do your organizations take to reach individuals?
Trust is the greatest multiplier of efficiency that I've found in my career. When you can build trust and take that time, you're going to spend the time one way or the other. You can spend the time up front building trust and gain an efficiency and, we can design the program because blah, 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 we know what we need to do. Or you can do like we did with our scorecard and, find later that we needed to go back and talk to community as well. And so now we've invested all that time, plus now we need to go back and, and that is not an efficiency, right? So I will offer an example that actually comes out of Morehouse School of Medicine with community health workers. The model of community health workers where you are tapping into the trust that already exists in a community to funnel information in a way that your recipient, your intended recipient, is primed to accept it. The specific program trained high schoolers to be community health workers, and they would practice just sort of baseline blood pressure checks, check your heart, look at some basic, with their grandmothers and aunts and like their family, right? And so that right there is like the most granular point of health you could think about, right? If, my brother and I got my dad to stop smoking when we were young because somebody told us smoking was horrible, and we went home and we're like, you're gonna die, you have to stop. And so he was like, oh my God, I have to get, that is what it took, right? Your children looking at you saying, stop doing this thing. So where can you find trust in the system and invest in it there? And then sort of watch the doors open and watch the results that you're looking for come in.
So repeat the same thing again. Meet people where they are, right? Like no matter what, we have a lot of amazing engineers on our team, Georgia Tech, Double E's and all these folks. I love how smart they are and their very technical degrees, but sometimes that kind of blinds you a little bit to understand that you need to reach out and talk to the people, even me at the AJC, people making $9 an hour, no skilled workers. We wouldn't have gotten to zero waste to landfill without talking to them and incorporating their ideas into what we're doing. Even though we're very smart in the management side and the executive side and the engineering side, really meeting those folks where they are so that we can design things ahead of time with a partnership, holding hands, so that we can accomplish our goals together.
And they want to do it.
They want to do it because they're part of the process. Exactly.
You've solved a problem for them, hopefully, because you listen. Yeah.
I'm going to say trust and agency. You need those two things. Without them, nothing's going to happen. John Kerry had a wonderful idea of having this thing called World War Zero, which was having, I think, 100,000 conversations about climate change. So in Ithaca, we implemented 1,000 conversations about climate change, and we invited people to talk to their families at home and record the conversation and then send it to us on a website. So we mined information that way, and we were able to understand the community better. Then there are other approaches like, post Pablo Escobar, Medellin, for example, how they actually brought in the gangs actually to work with policing, Medellin, or what Barcelona did with participatory budget. So there are examples, and this pains me to say, but what's the name of the crazy prime minister? Boris Johnson. Yeah, what Boris Johnson did in London, his model of democratic engagement was truly fantastic. And it pains me to say he's an asshole, but the reality is that model is something that we should do in the United States. Like truly engaging people. So.
Yeah, I think I'll take it again a slightly different direction. I totally agree with the idea of what you need to do. But to go back to a topic earlier discussed about greenwashing, I think the move away from greenwashing is incredibly important. And just to use the example that you gave earlier about getting people to recycle. I mean, basically, we have a 25-year history of putting little triangles with numbers inside them on materials that mean absolutely nothing about recycling. So we taught children that this little triangle meant recycling or recyclable, and it was all baloney. So this move now away from just giving people information and kind of misleading them about what it means, and actually giving them real actionable information that they can trust again, I think is huge. It's huge.
All right, thank you so much. So I could continue this forever, but I have already led you a little over time. I would like to give just one more round of applause for our incredible panelists.